Hey, we are back with another episode in our series on close reading. Today we have two close reading strategies, both of them acronyms, and you know how I feel about acronyms. But importantly, we're going to be using as a sample text the essay Black Men in Public Spaces by Brent Staples. We used this in the immediate previous episode where we talked about interrupted reading. There is a link to it down below. There's also a link to both of these strategies down in the description as well. So I'll catch you on the other side of the theme song. Welcome back. First, let me say that if you have not read Black Men in Public Spaces by Brent Staples, you need to do so, because I'm going to be talking about details from that and ideas from it. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then this exercise is not going to be very useful for you. So hit pause, go down, click the link, read, and then come back. Our acronym for the first part of this episode is CLOSE. CLOSE sounds like a perfectly reasonable strategy to use for close reading, doesn't it? I agree. At the top of our close graphic organizer is, of course, the letter C, which in this case stands for connotations. I want to real quick remind you, connotations are different from denotations. Denotations are the dictionary definitions of words, plain black and white meaning of the word. There are lots of different words, for example, that mean dog, canine, flea bag, etc. But connotation is the color or the emotional weight or the social baggage that is associated with that particular word. So a canine has a very different connotation than a flea bag, right? A puppy is better or has a more positive connotation than both of those. So when you're thinking about connotations, use this space to write down some of the words that the author is using that have particular weight behind them, and think a little bit about what that means. And for Staples' essay here, I might look at some of the connotations from his words in paragraph 1, where he's talking about, for example, the difference between affluent and impoverished. And elsewhere in paragraph 1, where he uses words like running and menacing with the sort of fear and worried. L does not stand for loser. No matter how much you love acronyms, you're not a loser. I'm not a loser. Instead, it stands for levels of meaning. You probably know, you're probably very aware, if you're here trying to learn more close reading strategies and how to be a better close reader, you know that texts work on multiple levels. Writers are writing what they write on purpose, but sometimes their purpose is to say many more things. There's a context and then there is a subtext. Main ideas, for example, can be implicit or explicit. In literature, they're going to be much more likely to be implicit. In an informational text like Staples' Black Men in Public Spaces, there's an obvious explicit main idea, which is that he, Brent Staples, has changed his behavior because of the societal pressure, societal expectations of the way Black men act. And for Brent Staples, I think you could also say that there is a deeper meaning to this. There's another level, which is that he's not just talking about a few people being mean to him. He's talking about this system. He's talking about our society. He's talking about what is happening in America that leads to this kind of behavior. Like, he had to change who he was and what he did because of the way other people saw him. And it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't just one or two people. It's a societal or a systemic problem. He's talking about a bigger picture here. O is for mode of composition. Okay, it isn't perfect. I'm sorry, but I did the best I could with what I had to work with. All right, mode of composition. When English teachers talk about a mode of composition, they're basically talking about the overall rhetorical structure. Obviously, a short story is a narrative, but you could also have things like comparison contrast. You could have process essays. I think Staples here is writing a definition essay. He is defining himself as a threat. He's using analogies like hitting a cowbell to scare away bears. But I think if you want to talk about a deeper level of meaning, he's also defining society as the kind of society that thinks they need a cowbell every time they see a black man. All right, S is for syntax. If you don't know what syntax is, it's basically sentence structure. What kind of sentences is the author using primarily? You can go back and visit Series 1 of Bullock's Rules for Writing and also Series 6. Those focused on different kinds of sentences and syntax. One easy thing to do is to look for the length of the sentences an author is using. Is an author generally writing long sentences with many subordinate clauses? He's writing these compound, complex kinds of sentences. Is an author writing short sentences? Is there a place where generally long sentences all in a row are punctuated by one short sentence at the end of a paragraph? To look for those things. If I were talking about Brent Staples, if I am talking about Brent Staples' syntax, his writing here is generally full of these longer sentences, these more complex sentences where he's talking about different interrelationships. And I think he does that partly because he is trying to define the system. He's trying to define himself as a threat and what he does to avoid the threat, but he is also trying to draw that comparison, that deeper level comparison between the way he's treated as an individual and the way black men are treated in society. The complexity of these sentences allows him to establish and elaborate on these relationships. And then finally, in close, our E stands for ethos, pathos, logos. It is the rhetorical appeals. And I want to direct you to Series 5 of Bullock's Rules for Writing, where I talked about rhetoric and the 3 rhetorical appeals. But just real quick, appeals to ethos are things that an author does to establish credibility with the audience. Appeals to pathos are attempts to manipulate the audience's emotions, and appeals to logos are attempts to use logical or evidentiary structures in order to prove or demonstrate conclusively what it is an author is saying. Thinking about the Staples text, you might say there's an issue of credibility. Well, okay, Brent, this is happening to you, but is it happening to everybody? He overcomes that by talking about how he is treated in different cities around the United States. He overcomes that by talking about the experiences of other black journalists he knows. And, as I just mentioned, his syntax of establishing these complex interrelationships. I think all of those things help to establish his own credibility. When you think about pathos and his appeals to it, we talked earlier about the different connotations, right? So he's using words that might conjure these ideas of fear or these ideas of danger. And in terms of logical arguments, he's bringing a ton of real specific examples to bear. So he's not just saying black men are treated as if they are criminals even when they are not. He's saying, here's when it happened, here's another time it happened, here's when it happened to a friend of mine, here's the third. So he's bringing that evidence, but then he's also doing things like making analogies which can help the audience understand. So E it's going to cover all of these, and you don't have to write about every single one when you are doing a close reading. But think about how the author employs all of them, and then decide maybe which one is the most important or which one the author relies on most heavily. All right, and that's going to bring us around to smell. And I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly because the smell graphic organizer and the close graphic organizer really cover a lot of the exact same ground. So hopefully this will go pretty fast. And we'll start with the S. Because S is actually a nice pickup from where we left off in the E of close. S stands for the sender-receiver relationship, or, what is it that the author is doing to establish his credibility, or her credibility, because ladies can be authors now too. In other words, S is all about the appeals to ethos. M is message, its main idea. So can you find a sentence where Staples expresses most clearly his main idea? And once you've found that sentence, you want to put it into your own words, particularly if you're going to take your information here and write an analysis. You can't just quote Staples. You also need to be able to say that Staples is writing about his power to change a situation just by being in it. E here does not stand for ethos appeals. That's what the S actually stood for. Instead, E stands for emotions, so emotional appeals, the appeals to pathos. And again, there's lots of it here. He's creating a palpable fear in the woman way back in paragraph 1. And in paragraph 10, he's manipulating her emotions by making you feel for his colleague when his colleague is in danger. And that's going to bring us around to the first of the two L's, which again, don't stand for loser. But the first L is logic. So you're getting the other appeal out of the way. So the logos appeals. And as we talked about in the segment on close, he's using significant first-hand evidence. This happened, as well as other kinds of evidence. And he's making analogies to help us understand. And then finally, the other L brings us full circle back around to where we started with close, because that L is about language. What linguistic techniques is the author using to make the argument more effective? And it could be something as simple as a simile or a metaphor. It could be something as simple as a complex syntax. It could be something as simple as using words that have negative connotations, like menacing and worried. So that is two close reading acronymic graphic organizers that you can use. And I just want to reinforce here that both of these require you not only to find the words in an author's text that are these things that help to establish the sender-receiver relationship, or that make it clear that the mode of composition is definition or something else, but also that you can paraphrase this, because that's what a significant part of your writing, if you're doing an analysis, is going to consist of, is you talking about the text in your own words, not just the quotes. Anyway, I hope these are helpful to you, and I will see you for the next one.